The Revolutionary Guards in Iran announced that they are ready for war and that Iran will not conduct new negotiations. Iran is threatening the United States, stating, "We will respond immediately to any violation of the understandings in this agreement." The negotiations are on the verge of exploding. Iran is piling up difficulties on the continuation of the talks, and the United States is waiting in Doha, Qatar. Today, we will bring you what is really happening behind the scenes of the negotiations. The Revolutionary Guards in Iran are trying to humiliate Witkoff and Kushner, who arrived in Qatar, but will not meet with the senior Iranian officials. And in Oman, is Oman becoming a key player in the United States-Iran negotiations and in general in the Middle East? And are they stabbing the United States in the back? Is it possible that Washington's ally is now moving closer to Iran's ranks? Today, we will bring you how Oman and Iran are cooperating behind the scenes despite the clear threat from the United States. And in Lebanon, Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, is sabotaging the implementation of the agreement with Israel. Iran is preparing for the funeral of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, a funeral that is supposed to be the largest in Iran's history, with about 20 million participants. It is still unclear whether Mujtaba will also arrive, and right now, it appears that an internal power struggle in Iran is also threatening the contacts with the United States. We will soon bring you all the information about the agreement that could dismantle the Hezbollah terrorist organization or set Lebanon on fire. The Peace Council will open humanitarian zones in the Gaza Strip for a population without Hamas. And a senior Revolutionary Guards official was killed mysteriously. Was this a Mossad assassination or a death with mysterious timing? Mohammad Akribzadeh, who was called the brain behind the Iranian strategy in the Strait of Hormuz, was killed in a car accident. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Shoshani, and we're boots on the ground. We bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel and also the full truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And today, I'm coming to you from Switzerland, as you can see the flag. Today is July 1st. New month. Let's begin. It was reported that the President of the United States held talks in recent days with War Secretary Hegseth and with Chief of Staff Kane about the possibility of renewing broad strikes in Iran in order, as it was said, to finish the job. Sources said that Trump has still not made a final decision, but in the meantime, he prefers to continue the talks with Tehran alongside pinpointed strikes in the event of a violation, even if this goes beyond the deadline set for August. And after being eliminated from the World Cup, Iran is launching an unusual attack on the United States. Diplomatic drama is reaching boiling points in Qatar. A special American envoy lands in Doha, but the Iranian delegation is setting conditions and firmly refusing a direct meeting. Alongside the threats from President Pezeshkian and the tension around the Strait of Hormuz, the President of the United States is issuing a dramatic ultimatum and warning. We may abandon the negotiations and complete the mission by military means. It appears that the Iranians are trying to understand where the limits of the American patience are. For days after the freezing of negotiations between Washington and Tehran, the sides are expected to arrive in Doha for a discussion on the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding. But unlike what happened in Switzerland, tomorrow's technical talks are not expected to include direct talks between the two sides. The delegations will meet with the mediators, Qatar and Pakistan, but not face to face. The Revolutionary Guards threaten to choose and close the Strait of Hormuz if they do not receive guarantees that Iran is the only one controlling it, and if the activity in the southern route does not stop, the Iranians are conditioning reaching a final agreement only after the implementation of the conditions in the Memorandum of Understanding, including a ceasefire in Lebanon. It appears that the Iranians are determined to take control of the strait. Despite direct threats from President Trump and despite firm opposition from Saudi Arabia and Western countries, The Revolutionary Guards in Iran and Oman are advancing a plan to collect service fees or tolls from Iran oil tankers that are passing through the strategic strait. And, in simple words, they want to collect protection money on every ship that passes the strait. Oman is proposing a voluntary model inspired by the Singapore Strait in order not to violate international law. But Iran declares there are no free services. If Oman does not join, we will collect by force. Before the outbreak of the war, the Strait of Hormuz served as a completely open and free international shipping route. Through the strait passed most of the oil and gas exports from the Persian Gulf to the world, and during the fighting, Iran imposed an effective blockade on the strait, which drove oil prices above $100 per barrel and severely hurt the American consumer. Now, when the war has been stopped under the temporary 60-day framework agreement, which promises free sailing without payment, the Iranians are making clear that they will not allow their route to return to its previous state. Look, the issue of opening the strait for the passage of ships stands at the heart of the negotiations between the United States and Iran. Yesterday, it was reported that the two countries agreed to stop the mutual attacks between them. These attacks took place in recent days, and to return to the negotiations on a final agreement to end the war. According to several of the sources, the United States offered to hold talks with Iran at a summit that will take place in Doha, the capital of Qatar. I will just remind you that last week, following the attack that was carried out by the Revolutionary Guards against a commercial ship in the Strait of Hormuz, the whole situation heated up again. In response to the Iranian attack, the United States military announced that it had struck targets in Iran. And in response to that, the Revolutionary Guards launched an attack on Bahrain and Kuwait. In both countries, sirens and echoes of explosions were heard, caused by the interception of the Iranian attacks. No casualties or damage were reported. Trump warned that if Iran's violations continue, it could reach a point where we can no longer be reasonable. And according to him, the United States would be forced to take military actions in order to finish the job. In such a case, Trump warned that the Islamic Republic will cease to exist. The Revolutionary Guards accused the United States of violating the Memorandum of Understanding and announced that 5 of their outposts were attacked along the coast of the Persian Gulf. In their statement, they emphasized that the Memorandum of Understanding gives Iran the authority to apply traffic arrangements in the Strait of Hormuz, and that Iran will respond with force to ships that violate the arrangements. Iran warned today that it will respond in an immediate and decisive way to any American violation of the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed this month between Tehran and Washington and intended to bring an end to the fighting in the Middle East. The spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Ismail Bagahi, said at the press conference in Tehran, "We will not leave any action unanswered." According to him, as the armed forces of the Islamic Republic have proven, any act of aggression against the Iranian targets will be met with an immediate and decisive response. The Revolutionary Guards updated the mediators that they will close the Strait of Hormuz again if they do not receive guarantees during the talks that Tehran is the sole controller of the strait. The Iranians demanded that the United States and other countries abandon the plan to use the southern route in the strait, which passes off the coast of Oman. So, what's happening in the talks and what comes next? Now, how will the talks in Doha be conducted? Despite the arrival in Doha of the American envoys Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the sides will not speak directly with the Iranians. Instead, they will meet separately with representatives of the mediators, Qatar and Pakistan, but not face to face. In addition, the Revolutionary Guards threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz if they do not receive guarantees that Iran is the only one controlling it, and if the activity in the southern route of the strait does not stop. It appears that Oman recently delivered to the United States and its allies in the West an official proposal, including a plan under which shipping companies will pay service fees for the use of the strait. A person familiar with the American position said that the American negotiating team received the Omani proposal, but has reservations that it intends to raise with the Omani officials themselves. And what are the frozen Iranian funds? What about them? Why are the Revolutionary Guards so obsessed with these frozen funds? So these are billions of dollars in Iranian oil and gas revenues that are outside of Iran, but blocked because of the American sanctions. The central story now is about $6 billion, but the Revolutionary Guards of Iran claim that it is actually $12 billion. The money came from oil sales to South Korea and was previously transferred to a supervised account in Qatar for humanitarian use only, like food, medicine, and civilian equipment. Iran wants the money without conditions and without supervision. Washington says, no, the money does not go directly to the regime, but only through a supervised mechanism in payments to suppliers, and only if Iran meets its commitments. The Revolutionary Guards are going wild over this because, from their perspective, this is not theoretical money. It is fuel for the system. They need dollars to fund missiles, drones, oil, smuggling, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq. Their problem is that the American model bypasses them. Instead of cash for the regime's treasury, supervised payments to suppliers, instead of free money for the access of terror, invoices for food and medicine. That's why Iran is applying pressure on Hormuz, threatening ships, trying to raise the price against Washington. Without releasing the money, there is no quiet. And what's happening inside Iran? Iran is facing one of the most severe environmental crises in its history. The phenomenon of land subsidence, which in the past was limited to a few areas, has in recent years become a broad national crisis, threatening infrastructure, entire cities, and even the future of the country's water economy. This emerges from a new report by the Research Center of the Iranian Parliament. And look, it's not clear what exactly is happening right now inside Iran, and what the Revolutionary Guards are trying to hide. Chaos in the banks in Iran. Is this a cyber attack? Or is the regime so dysfunctional that this is a collapse that they're trying to hide? What we know is that the residents of Tehran who arrived at the supermarket discovered that the payment terminals were dead. Anyone who tried to withdraw cash from an ATM found a dark screen. Pharmacies, municipalities, gas stations, all were left without with the error on screens, sorry about that, and stock credit transactions. So today, we will try to bring you what's really happening to the banks of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran. And within all of this, Israel is raising the pace in the plan to disarm Hezbollah, the terrorist organization in Lebanon. Are we before a new era? We will soon bring you everything that you need to know about the agreement between Israel and Lebanon. 14 clauses, a confidential annex, and no timetable for withdrawal between the diplomatic declarations and the reality in which Hezbollah and Iran are still on the ground. We will bring you a full analysis of the agreement and what Israel needs to do in order to neutralize their influence. In addition, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited today the security zone in southern Lebanon, together with Defense Minister Israel Katz and Deputy Chief of Staff Major General Tamir Yadain. And during the visit, Netanyahu made clear that Israel will continue to hold the area as long as Hezbollah is there and threatens the security of the Israeli civilians. In addition, the United States and 6 Arab countries that are members of the Terrorist Financing Targeting Center, TFTS, announced joint sanctions against 5 institutions and 16 senior officials in Hezbollah's financial systems. According to the United States Treasury Department, the sanctions are intended to harm the organization's ability to transfer funds, exploit the international systems financially, and fund its military activity in Lebanon and beyond. And in the Gaza Strip, the IDF continues to hold positions against the Hamas terrorist organization. The Peace Council will open humanitarian zones in the Strip for a population without Hamas. This is a pilot for the implementation of Clause 17 of the Trump plan, which will begin in the coming weeks. The goal? to begin separating Hamas from the population. But right now, the technocratic committee for managing Gaza will not enter the Gaza Strip as long as Hamas refuses to disarm. And in addition, the IDF and the Shin Bet yesterday eliminated Muhammad Fathi Abdel El-Hay Abu Fakar, the commander of the Yabna battalion in the Rafah brigade of Hamas's military wing. According to the IDF and the Shin Bet, Abu Fakar had recently worked to recruit terrorists to the terrorist organization that led by their training and tried to restore the battalion's capabilities. In addition, he was a veteran commander in Hamas and one of the senior figures in the supply department of the military wing. For about 20 years, he served as a central figure in the smuggling systems of the terrorist organization, and it appears that the dramas of the Middle East are also reaching Europe. France and Cyprus signed a new political contract providing a bilateral legal framework for the temporary housing of French forces in Cyprus, for humanitarian activities and for responding to crisis situations in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean basin. Turkey was very angry about the agreement and did not stay silent. The Turkish defense minister harshly attacked the agreement and called it an illegitimate initiative that violates Turkey's rights as a guarantor state. As you can see, there's a lot ahead of us. So let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Shoshani. We're here on Boots on the Ground, and we bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel and about the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And just before we begin, I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth, share our content with as many people as possible, click on the subscribe button, and look for us on our social media accounts to get the view through our eyes of what it's like to live in Israel under this war. You can search for Yair Pinto and Shoshani. Because across Israel, the war is still being felt every day, in communities under threat, in families displaced from their homes, and in emergency teams responding to danger at a moment's notice. The Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry is helping provide urgent, practical aid where it is needed most. Your support helps supply essential assistance, training, and specialized gear for volunteers, medical responders, and rescue teams serving on the front lines of this crisis. These are the people who run towards danger when others are forced to take shelter. They are treating the wounded, helping vulnerable families, and standing ready when every second matters. But they need the right equipment, the right training, and the resources to keep going. That's where you can make a real difference. Every donation goes directly towards saving lives in Israel, supporting those who are serving, rescuing, and caring for people in this difficult hour. So please do not wait. Stand with Israel in a practical and meaningful way today. You can visit Israel-Urgent.org. Again, that's Israel-Urgent.org. Make a donation and stand with Israel, because your gift can help save lives. Now let's get back to the news, because now we will move to our senior Middle East correspondent, Shoshani. Mati, is Iran trying to turn the Strait of Hormuz from an international maritime passage into a protectorate of the Revolutionary Guards? And is Oman playing a more dangerous role here than it seems?
Iran has figured out something quite alarming in recent months. They figured out that the Strait of Hormuz is the most effective weapon they have in their arsenal, possibly more scary and more detrimental to the global economy than the threat of a nuclear bomb. Why do I say this? Because the threat and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has pulled in more global attention by the international community, by the U.S. in negotiation efforts, than the bomb did in the past. And someone sat in Tehran and said to himself, you know what? We need to do this again and again and again and again, because this little note that we found on the keyboard, it works every single time. And that's exactly what's happening here. Iran is doubling down on its efforts to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, or the threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz always present in the minds of everyone around the world. And they're doing this in one important way. They've pulled in also the Omanis that are their neighbors straight across from the Strait of Hormuz, the Omanis, that their coastal waters were where ships were traveling through, suddenly said, you know what? We think we're aligning with Iran. What does this show you? It shows you that the threat of Iranian terrorism is greater than the persuasion or the anticipation of American protection and American military patronage. And that's alarming, because it shows you that something that we knew already about asymmetrical warfare, that even though you win in a war, it doesn't mean you've defeated the perception of fear of people from your enemies. And Iran is exactly that. They've lost in the asymmetrical war. Their army is long defeated. That's not the point. They're able to threaten ships traveling through the Strait of Hormuz time and time again. The IRGC have figured out that this is something they should never give up, because it is a chokehold on the global economy, a chokehold on the Gulf states, and it puts so much fear in the hearts of the Gulf states that they're able to just squeeze them, to push them to do their bidding. Oman, aligning with Iran, which they've done in recent days, on the, let's call it the statements of paying protection fees, which they're calling a toll fee, as they travel through the Strait of Hormuz. It just shows you how effective the Strait of Hormuz is. And it begs the question, if it's so effective, and if it gives so much power and the perception of power to the Iranian regime, why would they give up control of the Strait of Hormuz? And if you, like me, think that the answer is, well, that doesn't really make sense, why would they give up? We're all onto something. They're not planning to give up. They're not planning to give up because the Iranian regime does one thing continuously throughout its history since 1979, since the Islamic Revolution. What do? They lie, and they cheat, and they threaten, and they use violence against their own people and against other people. There has never been a day in the life of that regime where they said, you know what, this whole violence and hatred thing against the West and against Israel, we need to stop with it. It's not taking us to a good direction. That's not who they are. Their fundamental, their core DNA is death and destruction. Their core DNA is nuking Israel, nuking the United States. They've said this publicly, repeatedly, for decades. Their whole methodology is bringing down the world around them, is watching the club burn, is watching the world burst into flames around them and enjoying the scenery. And they don't care about the suffering of their people or the suffering of others. That's beside the point. That's just an added benefit to them. They figured out that this works, and they're going to keep putting pressure on it. And there's one big if here. The reason they're able to do this is because no one, including the United States right now, is willing to stop them from doing it. Because to every military problem, there is a military solution, but that solution comes with a price. Can the U.S., with its vast army, the biggest maneuvering army on earth, the best equipped, the best trained, the best technology, the best weaponry, can that army not stop the Iranians from sabotaging ships from traveling through the Strait of Hormuz? Obviously, they can. They can take over the coastal areas. They can take over the islands. They can bomb every Iranian target that threatens the ship passage in that area, but it comes with a cost. When you have boots on the ground, there's other boots on the ground that will oppose them. That comes with casualties. And the U.S. definitely, leading into the midterms, is not interested in seeing that. And don't get me wrong, I understand them. This is political mayhem if you go into that kind of step or decision. And yet, there is a solution. And the problem is the Iranians are willing to do more than others. They're willing to fight and absorb casualties on their side. They're willing to attack and lose assets because they expect that they can suffer longer, that they're more long-suffering, that they have more grit, that they have more resolve and are willing to lose more than their enemies. And I hate to tell you this, guys, up till this point, they're correct in that statement. It's scary, it's unpleasant, but that is the reality. The asymmetrical warfare presented by Iran of firing rockets and drones that blow up ships traveling through the Strait of Hormuz, that is enough to scare away Iran's enemies. Scare them so much that they align, even behind the scenes, with the Iranian agenda and the Iranian desires. It's very problematic, and until we're able to change that equation, it will continue happening. And more importantly, I need to tell you, the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed.
Mati, is Iran even capable of reaching a real agreement with the United States, or is the internal power struggle in Tehran turning every negotiation into a show that has no real authority behind it?
Can Iran actually be trusted in a negotiation? Are they able to even make a decision on their own? That has been a major question in the background of all of this. All these months of war going all the way back to the end of February, in the question of what really will happen with this negotiation, what can really What can really be done with Iran? And I have to tell you, I'm not sure I have good news for you guys. There's a couple big problems here. One, there has been a question sort of hovering all over this entire situation, whether or not Iran is able to commit as a country. Why do I say this? Because it's unclear who's actually calling the shots in Iran. Is it the IRGC, some hidden shadow council behind the scenes who's calling the shots? Sometimes that seems the way. Is it the supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei? Doesn't seem to be the case. Is it the political leadership? Pezeshkian, the president, maybe? Not really. He's the one negotiating. You see these these missions of Iranian diplomats and Iranian parliamentaries and Iranian representatives of all the different entities showing up at the negotiation. What I've heard from Iranian experts is that very fact, the fact that that keeps happening, just shows how little of a resolve, how little of a unity exists in the leadership in Iran. Because if you have to send the representative of every organization in the country to the negotiations, it shows that no one can really carry a decision through. That's what's really happening here. That's the problem that sort of is hovering over this entire conversation. Now we need to ask a second question. Forget can Iran. Will Iran as a country commit to disarming itself? I just, in a recent flight, finished reading a book, fascinating. We're definitely going to be carrying out some interviews on this topic. On a recent book that was published, talking about the history of Israel stopping the Iranian nuclear achievements. And what you realize there is fascinating and alarming at the same time. Iran, if it wasn't for Israeli Mossad efforts, would have had a bomb probably sometime in 2008. And Iran, time and time again, with sanctions and without sanctions, with IAEA supervision, with the JCPOA and without the JCPOA, with Trump inside the agreement and with Trump withdrawing from the agreement, it doesn't matter what the case was, Iran keeps pushing for a bomb because they believe that that's their right and they believe it's the right way to go. Iran keeps funding proxies regardless of what document they've signed on. Iran keeps fighting against their neighbors and fighting against Israel through their proxies regardless of what the document says. And I need to take this to Lebanon for just a second. Israel, Lebanon, and the United States are working on an agreement in which Israel, together with Lebanon, is supposed to build up the Lebanese army to the point where we can all push out Hezbollah. Israel can withdraw somewhere near the international border, and Lebanon can protect its own country. But what's the problem? The biggest entity that is destabilizing that country, Hezbollah, through Iranian financing, ideology, and training, is the one who's disrupting the entire process. And if that's the situation, how do you stabilize that? And that really goes back to this core tenet of what the Iranian regime is. The Iranian regime is a regime that has sworn to destroy Israel and destroy the United States. They've said it over every stage, over decades, time and time again. They've made it clear to us that they plan to carry out that action. They made it clear that they tried to reach a bomb, and unless Israel repeatedly bombed their facilities, eliminated their scientists, and together with the U.S. in several different rounds, buried those underground bunkers that they built for their nuclear plan, they would have already long ago carried the possibility of having a nuclear weapon. And the list goes on. Unless stopped, they would carry on trying to finance their proxies. Unless stopped, they would carry on trying to disrupt and disable the global economy. Those are the people that we're negotiating with. And combine those two questions. One, the question of, is there even someone in Iran who's able to have this conversation and commit on behalf of the entire country? Huge doubt on that topic. I'm not sure there is. And the second one is, even if they do sign and they do have the power to do that, are they willing to do that? Are they willing to follow through on that agreement? And there, I'd say it's a little more of a bleak future. It seems almost impossible to me that the Iranian regime that has been fundamentally on this route for decades at this point is going to change and pivot. It just doesn't seem logical to me. They've made it clear time and time again that this is their goal. And if that's their goal, why are we negotiating here? They've lied about their nuclear plan. They've continued to fund proxies. They continue to smuggle and avoid anything that's related to the blockade on them or to the sanctions on them. Why can you imagine that now they're going to negotiate in good faith when they've lied, cheated, and used violence every single turn in the road up till this point? And the answer is they're not going to. They're going to continue doing the same thing. And I think we need to understand here that a peace with Iran should be counted as peace in the idea of Islam, as a hudna. Hudna is just a ceasefire while you are still able to recollect, regather yourself until you attack against your enemy again. Iran is going to do that. They want the U.S. to leave them alone. They want the U.S. to back down from them. They want the U.S. to give them some breathing space so they can rebuild, rearm, strengthen back up, and get some cash in their quickly emptying bank accounts. That's what they're going for. And we need to stop them. We need to stop them now. We need to stop them quickly. And we need to continue applying maximum military, diplomatic, and political pressure on them. There is no other solution. There is no other way.
And Mati, is Israel now facing the same model on 3 fronts: Lebanon, Gaza, and Hormuz? Terrorists, organizations that lose on the ground and then try to receive immunity through international agreements.
We're living in a scary and bizarre world, a world in which terrorist organizations start wars and attack innocent and kill innocent civilians. And then when a country retaliates against them, they start screaming, "Help me, help me. The big aggressor is coming for me." And then the weird part about this is that organizations around the world, including the UN on many occasions, look at the situation and say, you know what? The terrorist organization, they're the victim here. Let's aid them. Let's stop this act of aggression on them. We call for all sides for ceasefire. We call for all sides to secede or stop the acts of violence. This has been a repeated narrative, and it's more repeated when it comes to Israel. Israel was attacked by Hamas on October the 7th. The next day, countries around the world had demonstrations break out calling for stop Israeli aggression, while terrorists were still roaming southern Israel, killing Israeli civilians, not army. This was not a military conflict. This was an act of terrorism against civilians. Hezbollah joined into this war and attacked Israel. And shortly thereafter, the international community, of course, championed by Iran, the great champions of civil rights, call out and say, guys, we need to stop the aggression, the war taking place in Lebanon, stop Israeli aggression against Hezbollah, the terrorists who started the war. But they didn't do this once, they've done it repeatedly. And somehow, bizarrely, radical Islam and the terrorism that is tied to it finds a partner in, how do I say this politely, in the extreme left around the world, the global leftist, the global extreme woke movement that has lost its moral backbone. And that's what we're witnessing right now. UN entities that look at the situation and say, clearly Israel is the aggressor. If only Israel would stop, then everything would go back to being peaceful. While everyone knows fully, completely, that the aggressors are the terrorists, not the state of Israel. There's no debate on this topic. And that's the weird situation we're living in. Iran is the aggressor, and then they're calling on the international community, stop American aggression. Hezbollah is the aggressor, and Iran and the international community call on Israel to stop defending itself against Hezbollah. Hamas is the aggressor, and yet we're said that Israel is genocidal. Israel is recklessly violent and destructive in the Gaza Strip, while all that time we're trying to protect ourselves against Hamas terrorists that have sworn and done this publicly to destroy the state of Israel. Well, what are we supposed to do? Well, we're in a complicated situation where we're forced to fight and defend ourselves against our enemies, while a disconnected and moralist international community looks aside and says, you know what? The big aggressor here is Israel. The big aggressor here is not the terrorist organization that started this whole thing. The big aggressor here is Israel. And you know what? If this was only an Israel problem, I'd say, you know what? Anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred in the world. I get it. We'll survive on our own. But that's not the case. This same problem is existing also in other countries. It exists also in Western countries now, throughout Europe, throughout the US, who look at the most morally corrupt acts of theft and embezzlement, the most morally corrupt acts of sexual assault against their own people, against the young girls and women of their country, and they're unable to point at evil and call it evil. They're unable to do it. Just look up what's been happening in the UK in recent months and the silence of the international community and the international press on this topic. Same thing has happened in European countries. Assaults by radical Islam who drive cars through their Christmas markets, who assault the women of their countries, who continuously carry out violent attacks, but they're unable to point and say, this is the source of that problem. And instead, look to the Middle East, look at Hamas, look at Hezbollah, look at Iran, and instead of recognizing the evil that is there, point at Israel and say, you are the source of all of this. And I want to say one last thing here. It's no longer a coincidence, and it's no longer a misunderstanding. It's not very hard to tell in the war between Iran, the US, and Israel who the villain is, they've dressed the part. They've put on the outfit. They've made a press release in every possible language to tell you clearly, we are a villain. We want to watch the world burn. We want to bring down Western civilization. We want to nuke you all. And they say this repeatedly over decades and decades and decades. And somehow the world looks and they said, you know what? I'm really having a hard time figuring out who the bad guy is here. I think everyone should just stop fighting. That seems to be the best solution. That is how absurd this conversation is. And there's one last part here, which is in the war between a symmetrical country, as in a democracy, and asymmetrical warfare, it's very hard to defeat the asymmetrical adversary. And I'll explain this. The US is stronger than the Iranians when it comes to warfare. Their army is stronger, they're stronger politically, they're stronger financially. But when it comes to really ending the threat of the Iranian regime, it's very hard to end it. Why is it so hard to end it? Because the Iranians don't care. They don't care about harming their population. They don't care about destroying their economy. They don't care about destroying the economies of their neighbors. They would be happy, and they've done it themselves, to kill their own population anytime they speak against them. So what do you threaten a regime who's happy for destruction? What do you threaten a regime that has this end times Shia Islamic eschatology that believes, in a very bizarre way, that having the world destabilized, having the world fall into a state of war and violence is the right thing that will promote and bring forth their version of the Messiah? If they believe that, and they're willing to see that happen, what do you threaten them with? Death and destruction? They want to die, and they want destruction, and they've done it themselves. What do you threaten them with? The only thing you can threaten them with is taking away their government, taking away their power, taking away their regime, and freeing their people, because the opposite, the opposition of their evil is freedom. The opposition of their religious oppression is religious freedom, is freedom of faith for their people. That is the opposition there. And the problem is there's no easy way to get to there. There's no quick fix to this enormous and never-ending problem that is the Islamic Republic of Iran, that is the radical and radicalizing in, let's call it in a progressive way, regime of Iran, the Ayatollahs, the IRGC, who have sworn war on our Western way of life. And they've done it through proxies, they've done it directly, and we just need to be strong against them. There is no quick fix here. The only quick fix is to be resolute, to be clear, to speak the truth repeatedly, and only when we've done that can we expect to see a different result. And there's one more thing here, another little asterisk. We also need to speak against the liars and the deceivers in Western society, those who are not able to name evil, who look at a terrorist organization and say, I'm not sure that they're that bad. Those kind of people, they need to be publicly shamed, publicly named, publicly called out for the corrupt and broken entities that they are. The UN is high on that list, but several other European countries have the same ailment, the same sickness that prevents them from seeing the difference between good and evil. That you thought it was an external issue, you thought it was an Israel issue. It's now an internal issue for those countries too. Just follow the news of what's happening in Europe and in certain places in the US to see what happens. We're not able to point at a religious movement that has committed, that has sworn itself publicly to destroy your way of life and to say, you know what, we need to stop that. And if you're not able to stand up for what you think is important, ultimately, you're going to lose everything. Israel has learned the lesson. We've been able to fight against our enemies time and time again and do so effectively with the grace of God. And now it's the turn of other countries too to wake up, for the British people, for the German people, for the French people to wake up and say, no, there is good and bad in the world. We want to be on the side of good. But for that to happen, there's also a religious, a faith issue of them reconnecting with a religious source at the foundation of their declarations of rights, of independence, the Judeo-Christian values. When you're departed of that, it's very hard to be morally clear. And it's time to reconnect with that morality, reconnect with the root of that morality. I think we're seeing the beginning of that, but there's a lot more work to come.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani. That definitely helped us better understand what we're dealing with. And to all of you, continue spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. Look for Yair, Pinto, and Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts. Because in the Strait of Hormuz, the event that reignited this entire crisis began with one commercial ship. Not a warship, not an American base, not an Israeli strike. A commercial vessel moving through one of the most sensitive maritime routes in the world. and it became the signal that Iran is no longer treating the Memorandum of Understandings as a diplomatic document. It is treating it as a battlefield. According to the American version, Iranian drones were launched towards a ship moving near the strait. Some were intercepted, one hit the vessel, and in response, the United States struck the Iranian military targets along the Persian Gulf coast, drone storage sites, missile facilities, and radar positions that are connected to the threat against the maritime traffic. And that's the key point. This is no longer only a debate over nuclear enrichment, frozen money, or diplomatic language. Iran is trying to turn the Strait of Hormuz into a tool of pressure, and the Revolutionary Guards, they believe that this may be their strongest card. On paper, the temporary framework is supposed to guarantee free passage through Hormuz for 60 days. That was one of the central understandings meant to calm the region, lower energy pressure, and prevent the war from spreading into the global economy. But Iran is already signaling that the strait will not return to the way that it was before the war. Tehran is saying, in effect, there are no free services. Oman is trying to present a softer model. Muscat is speaking about voluntary contributions from ships that use the strait, payments that could be framed as support for safety, maintenance, rescue services, and navigation. Oman's foreign minister has argued that a direct transfer of tolls would be illegal, but that a voluntary mechanism might be possible. Iran wants something very different. The Revolutionary Guards want this to become mandatory. They want the world to pay for passage through Hormuz, and they want Iran to recognize and to be recognized as the power that can guarantee, regulate, pressure, and punish ships that do not follow its rules. For the Revolutionary Guards, this is not just about money. It's about sovereignty. It's about power. It is about forcing the United States, the Gulf states, Europe, and Asia to admit that Iran holds a hand over one of the most important arteries of the global economy. That is why the talks in Doha matter so much. American envoys Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff arrived in Qatar, but at this stage, they're not expected to sit directly with senior Iranian officials. Instead, Qatar and Pakistan are working as mediators with technical teams discussing the implementation of the memorandum. The issues on the table are huge: the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear program, the release of frozen funds, and the future of the temporary understandings. Iran's message is blunt. It is not entering new negotiations with the United States. Tehran says that the talks ended when the memorandum was reached, and that the only thing happening now is implementation. In other words, Iran is trying to lock the Americans into the document while giving itself room to interpret the document in the most aggressive way possible. That is exactly what's happening in Hormuz. The Revolutionary Guards argued that the memorandum gives Iran the right to regulate traffic in the strait. They claim that ships using routes that Iran does not approve can be treated as violating the understandings. They also demand that the United States and other countries stop using the southern route near Oman as a way to bypass the Iranian pressure. And when Oman and the international maritime officials tried to build a safer route through the Omani waters, Iran answered with force. Ships were attacked, drone activity increased, maritime traffic dropped sharply. What was supposed to be a de-escalation mechanism became another front. This is why Saudi Arabia is deeply concerned. Riyadh understands that if the world accepts a new Iranian agreement in Hormuz under pressure, then Iran has learned a dangerous lesson: create a crisis, threaten energy markets, attack ships, and then demand a fee to stop doing it. And that's also why Washington is resistant any kind of formula that gives Iran a financial reward for threatening freedom of navigation. The American position is clear: no tolls, no disguised payments, no donations that become a political victory for the Revolutionary Guards. But inside Iran, this is not just a foreign policy debate. It's also a power struggle. President Masoud Pezeshkian and the civilian leadership need money. Iran's economy is under heavy pressure. The banking system is shaky. The public is frustrated. The regime wants billions of dollars in frozen funds released from Qatar, and Tehran is trying to present this as part of the understandings with Washington. The Revolutionary Guards see the situation differently. For them, the release of frozen money is important, but Hormuz is more important. Frozen funds are a one-time achievement. Control of Hormuz is a permanent weapon. It gives Iran leverage every day, every hour, within every ship that moves through the strait. That's why the hardliners are pushing the line that the strait should remain under pressure as long as Israel continues to strike the Iranian-backed forces and as long as the Washington entities do not deliver everything that Tehran believes that it was promised. So Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakir Ghalibaf made the regime's position clear. The ceasefire declaration and the lifting of the maritime blockade are central parts of the memorandum. But he also warned that if the United States refuses to implement what was agreed, Iran is ready for war. And that statement matters because Iran is trying to speak in two voices at once. To the world, it says that it supports safe passage in Hormuz. To its own base, it says that no one will enjoy oil if Iran is prevented from selling its own oil. To mediators, it says that it wants implementation. To the Revolutionary Guards, it says that the door needs to remain open for escalation. And while Tehran plays this game abroad, something very serious is happening inside Iran. 4 major Iranian banks, including Bank Melli, Tajirat, Sederat, and the Export Development Bank, suffered severe electronic service disruptions after damage to a shared communications backbone. In Tehran, people reported dead payment terminals in supermarkets, dark ATM screens, problems at pharmaceuticals, municipal offices, gas stations, and transactions that simply froze in the middle. For ordinary Iranians, this is not an abstract debate about Hormuz. This is the moment when the regime talks about controlling global oil traffic while citizens cannot reliably pay for food, medicine, fuel, or basic services. And that raises the bigger question. Was this a cyber attack, or is it a sign of a deeper collapse inside the system? Either way, it exposes a critical weakness. Iran wants to project power across the Middle East, but its own economic infrastructure is under stress. The Revolutionary Guards, they want to force the world to pay at sea, while the Iranian public is watching basic services fail on land. That is the contradiction at the heart of this moment. Iran wants the world to believe that it is strong enough to control Hormuz, strong enough to dictate terms in Doha, strong enough to keep Hezbollah armed in Lebanon, strong enough to rebuild its influence in Gaza, and strong enough to threaten the United States. But the facts on the ground show something very different. Iran is dangerous, but it is also pressured. It's aggressive, but it's also vulnerable. It is escalating because it knows the window for leverage may be closing. What you see on YouTube is only part of the story. Get closer to the first-hand reports, behind-the-scene moments, and stories of faith, resilience, and hope from Israel. You can do that by going to tbn.org/journeys/boots or text boots to 316-316. Again, that's tbn.org/journeys/boots or text boots to 316-316 for direct updates from TBN Israel. Again, with Mati Shoshani and myself, Yair Pinto, that are reporting from the land. We're not just watching the news, we are witnessing together what's happening. And TBN Israel brings honest, first-hand coverage from the ground in Israel to viewers around the world. So in partnership with the wider TBN family, we share what's really happening through a Christian perspective rooted in truth, faith, and the people living every single day in this situation. So your support helps deliver underground reporting, real stories of resilience and hope, and trusted coverage that connects Christians to Israel. And while Iran is trying to reshape the rules at sea, Israel is reshaping the rules on land, especially in Lebanon. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the security belt in southern Lebanon together with Defense Minister Israel Katz and senior IDF commanders. The message from that visit was unmistakable. Israel is not returning to the old reality on the northern border. For years, Hezbollah built an entire terror army under the protection of the Iranian Axis. Rockets, missiles, tunnels, weapons depots, attack villages, and underground infrastructure were placed right across the Israeli communities. Hezbollah wanted the people of northern Israel to live under permanent threat. Israel is now dismantling that threat piece by piece. Netanyahu told the soldiers that Israel struck the Iranian Axis and began crushing it. He said that Israel hit Iran itself and removed an existential threat. He also said that Hezbollah once had around 150,000 rockets and missiles, but today only a small fraction of that capability remains. The Israeli policy is clear. Hezbollah will not be allowed to rebuild the same threat along the border. Israel is destroying above-ground and underground terror infrastructure, clearing attack drones, and building a security reality on the Lebanese side of the border, not on the Israeli side. And that's a major change. For years, Israel observed threats from the Lebanese front, while Hezbollah hid behind the weakness of the Lebanese state. Now Israel is saying openly, if there is a threat to our soldiers or our communities, we will act. We will not wait. We will not return to the conditions that allowed October 7th to become a model for other fronts. This is also why the emerging Israeli-Lebanon framework is so explosive. Supporters of the agreement in Lebanon say that it may be the only way to end the fighting, restore stability, bring international support, and force the Lebanese state to make responsibilities and decisions. But Hezbollah, it sees it as humiliation. Naim Qassem called it shameful, a surrender of sovereignty, and a deal that has no right to exist. That is because the agreement points directly at the core issue, Hezbollah's weapons. As long as Hezbollah remained armed, the Lebanese state is not sovereign. As long as Hezbollah can decide war or peace, Lebanon cannot truly make peace. And as long as Iran controls Hezbollah's trigger finger, the northern border cannot be stable. It's very simple. Iran is colonizing Lebanon with its terrorist organization Hezbollah. That's the truth. This is why Nabih Berri and other Lebanese political actors are trying to build opposition to the Washington-backed framework. They may avoid the streets for now. They may fight it politically and constitutionally, but the battle is real because the agreement does not just challenge Hezbollah's military power. It challenges Hezbollah's position inside the Lebanese system. And at the same time, Hezbollah is being hit financially. The terrorist financing targeting center, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, announced a joint sanctions move against Hezbollah's financial infrastructure. The targets include institutions and individuals connected to the El-Qard El-Hassan and Bait El-Mal, two key pillars of Hezbollah's shadow economy. El-Qard El-Hassan presents itself as a social and financial institution, but in practice, it functions as a parallel banking system for Hezbollah. Beit El-Mal operates as an official treasury. These systems help Hezbollah move money, protect assets, fund operations, and survive even when Lebanon's formal economy is collapsing. This is the larger campaign now unfolding. Israel is hitting Hezbollah militarily. The United States and the Gulf states are hitting Hezbollah financially, and the Lebanese agreement is hitting Hezbollah politically. The combination is exactly what Iran fears, because Hezbollah is not just another proxy. Hezbollah was the crown jewel of Iran's regional project. It was the most powerful arm of the Revolutionary Guards on Israel's border. If Hezbollah loses its military freedom, its financial channels, and its political veto, then Iran loses one of the most important tools that it has spent decades to build. In Gaza, the same logic is beginning to appear in a different form. The IDF and the Shin Bet eliminated Muhammad Fathi Abdel El-Hay Abu Fakur, the commander of the Yabna battalion in Hamas's Rafah brigade. He was not just another field commander. For years, He was involved in Hamas's supply and smuggling systems, helping move weapons into Gaza and rebuilding terrorist capabilities. According to Israel, he was working to rebuild his battalion, recruit terrorists, and prepare attacks against the IDF forces. His elimination shows that even under the current arrangements, Israel is not allowing Hamas to quietly regenerate its military power. And at the same time, a new humanitarian and political experiment is being prepared in the Gaza Strip under the framework of the Peace Council. The idea is to create areas without Hamas control, beginning with Tel Sultan near Rafah. Civilians should be separated from Hamas. Humanitarian aid would enter through controlled channels, and Hamas would be cut away from the population one layer at a time. This is not full reconstruction. There's no concrete. There is no rebuilding that allows Hamas to restore tunnels or military infrastructure. The plan focuses on caravans, food, medical services, and basic shelter, while the IDF continues to hold positions beyond the yellow line and maintains operational freedom against threats. Supporters of the plan say that this is how Hamas can be defeated, not only by striking fighters, but by separating Hamas from the territory, from the population, and from the resources. Critics in Gaza and the Gaza envelope warn that any humanitarian zone before Hamas is fully disarmed could become another trap, another space where Hamas rebuilds, recruits, and hides behind civilians. This argument is real. But the direction is clear. Israel is trying to avoid the Lebanese mistake. It does not want a technocratic committee in Gaza that is formally civilian but practically controlled by armed terrorists. This is why the Palestinian Authority is not being allowed to simply walk back in without major reforms. And it is why Hamas will not be allowed to control reconstruction through weapons. The region is watching all of this very closely. France has signed a military status agreement with Cyprus, giving French forces a framework for temporary presence during humanitarian and crisis operations in the Middle East and in the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey is furious, of course. Ankara sees this as a threat to its role in Cyprus and a challenge to its influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. This may sound far away from Iran, from Lebanon, or from Gaza, but it's part of the same regional picture. After the war with Iran, after evacuations from Israel, after the rising need for emergency access and military logistics, Europe is preparing for a Middle East that may remain unstable for a very long time. Even the American private sector is adapting. JP Morgan Chase is preparing to invest billions of dollars in its own capital into companies tied to American national security, defense production, energy, mining, artificial intelligence, and strategic infrastructure. The reason is simple. The United States is in a race to rebuild its industrial base. The war in Ukraine, the Middle East crisis, the confrontation with Iran, and the growing need for missiles, interceptors, and air defensive systems have exposed how stretched the Western defense supply chain has become. That's not a side story. It's part of the same war. Because the next stage of this conflict will not be decided only by speeches, summits, or temporary understandings. It will be decided by who can produce interceptors, who can keep ships moving, who can protect the energy routes, who can prevent terror groups from rebuilding, and who can sustain pressure longer. Iran understands this. Israel understands this. The United States understands this. And that's why the world is now watching three fronts at once. At sea, Iran is trying to turn Hormuz into a pressure point and a source of income. In Lebanon, Israel is trying to prevent Hezbollah from rebuilding the northern threat. In Gaza, Israel is trying to separate Hamas from the population and stop the terror machine from returning under a different name. And behind all of the three fronts stands the same question. Is the Iranian axis being contained, or is it simply changing shape? Because Iran may be under pressure, but it is not finished. Hezbollah may be weakened, but it is not gone. Hamas may be damaged, but it is still trying to rebuild. And the Revolutionary Guards, they are still searching for every possible way to turn chaos into leverage. And this is why the coming days are so important. If the Doha track collapses, Hormuz could reignite again. If Hezbollah blocks the Lebanese framework, The northern front could heat up again. If Hamas manages to infiltrate the humanitarian structure in Gaza, the entire post-war plan could become another battlefield. And if Iran feels that the money, the maritime leverage, and the political pressure are slipping away, the Revolutionary Guards may choose escalation over compromise. The Middle East is not entering a quiet period. It's entering a test. The ceasefires, the memorandums, the mediators, and the diplomatic language are all important, but they're fragile. The real question is whether the forces on the ground will obey them, manipulate them, or blow them apart. And right now, from Hormuz to Beirut, from Rafah to Doha, the Iranian axis is testing exactly that. So keep spreading the truth. Follow us, and most importantly, do not forget to click that subscribe button so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another update of Boots on the Ground. You can look for us on our social media accounts, Yair, Pinto, Shoshani, and the best thing you can do is to pray for the situation. And above all, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. And we'll see you again tomorrow.